Today on Cloud Slaw, I'm going to let you hack my account. Last week, we covered one of the top two ways cloud accounts are exploited, which is why we learned how to not make things public. Personally, I was getting my guard duty alerts within about 3 hours of opening up SSH. Today, we're going to cover the other top source of incidents, which is exposed credentials. If the thousands of you participating in these labs learns just these two lessons, and only these two lessons, I'd probably qualify for a Nobel Prize in cybersecurity. They should totally have one of those. Way back in our second lab, we created our one and only IAM user. And after that, we immediately moved to using IAM roles, not too long after the IAM Identity Center. Heck, the very subtitle of that IAM Identity Center post says, and I quote, of the admin user post says, quote, even though we will hunt down and destroy IAM users later, it's important to set one up early for break glass emergencies. Even though we are still in our network and workload learning block, we need to spin back into IAM a little bit because these two things are so closely coupled. As our last string of labs has shown, a vast majority of our instances and other workloads will have IAM roles which grant them permissions to do things in our AWS accounts. Pretty soon, we'll see how AWS handles that internally and how instance profiles and IAM roles work. But to build into that, we need to understand how AWS handles authorizations for API calls. If you recall, authorization, also shorthanded as authn, is the process of asserting an identity. It's basically the process of logging in. And now that's easy enough to see when we log into the console. But what if you're using the command line for API calls? Or what if you want your computer at home or a server in a corporate data center to make those API calls without you sitting there? You can't assign it a role because it doesn't live inside of AWS. Actually, you can these days using something called AWS IAM Roles Anywhere, and it's relatively new, and it would totally ruin my narrative if you knew it existed, so pretend I didn't bring that up. Anyway, we'll talk about those at another time. Before roles, and long before IAM Roles Anywhere, AWS created access keys. Access keys go way back to the origins of AWS, and in those dark days, we didn't even have IAM, just the root account. And to make API calls, you would create an access key and a secret access key pair. Think of these as the username and a password for API calls that you can embed in code or save into configuration files. Now, why didn't Amazon just use usernames and passwords? Well, a lot of reasons. But if you're reading this, you probably understand that storing usernames and passwords in plain text configuration files or software code is bad, like Stay Puft Marshmallow Man bad. Not that static and access keys in plain text are much better, but maybe it's like that little Stay Puft Marshmallow Man from the other movies, and I'm taking this too far. And a lot of you probably didn't see the other movies. More importantly, the way the AWS APIs work is that every single request is signed with the access and the secret key. Now, I'm really simplifying this almost to the point of inaccuracy, but it's enough so you can understand the concepts. If you want to dig in more, I've got a PDF linked in the blog post that goes along with this lab to a YouTube presentation by AWS called A Day in the Life of a Billion Requests, or just go search on it. It's great. So the technique used is something called request signing, and it allows AWS to support API calls over unencrypted network communications because the actual API calls themselves are natively or inherently encrypted. An access key for an IAM user looks like this over whichever shoulder I decide to insert it on, and a secret access key looks like this. Now, notice those first four characters on the access key, AKIA. That's the starting sequence for an access key associated with an IAM user. Now, if it were a role, it would start with ASIA, and we're going to learn about that next week. Those AKIAs are one of the biggest sources of cloud security breaches. Why? Because the access key secret key combo is just a new kind of static credential embedded in code and configuration files, which makes them super easy to expose or steal. Developers leave these things in code posted to GitHub. Admins have them in text files on their computers and laptops that get compromised. People insert them into virtual machines and containers that are sitting in data centers. It's just a total mess. And if an attacker gets those, they can use them from wherever they want, anytime they want, with whatever permissions that IAM user is assigned. So IAM users equals a username and a password for the console and can have an access key and a secret key for logging in via API or making API calls. Those are static credentials, and when the bad guys get those, it's kind of game over. Despite the fact we have so many tools to avoid using access keys, they're the easy path. And so we still see them used all over the places, and they're still one of the biggest sources of breaches. So, as an official officer of Cloud S.L.A.W, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to hunt down and destroy every AKIA you can find. If you're doing this at work, get permission first. I don't want to get you fired, and it's not my fault. All right, let's go jump into the lab and see how this all works. Be kind of fun, and hopefully it's going to show you why you want to be so careful with credentials and you want to get rid of those IAM users and especially those access keys, those AKIAs, which is our like Cloud Security Pro shorthand for access keys. We're going to do a couple of things. We're going to log in. If you still have your CloudFormation template with your SSH host from last week running, I'm going to remind you to shut that thing down. Then we're going to launch a new template. While that's running, I'm going to show you how to create, we will create an access key that you will then immediately destroy. Then you're going to log into the instance with Session Manager. And within there, I'm going to show you a little command line. You're going to actually see that static access key. I have embedded one in that instance that's going to let you connect to my account, and we're going to see what happens. All right, so let's go ahead and log into your sign-in portal. From your sign-in portal, as usual, we're going to go back to test account 1 with our administrator access. Wait, what is going on here with all this blackness? Well, Amazon updated the portal, and depending on your mode, I had it on browser default. I actually prefer light mode for most of the AWS stuff. I think it looks a little bit better, and that's what I'm going to do all my screenshots with because it looks prettier on my blog. All right, so we'll go to test account 1 and administrator access. And the first place we're going to go, as you might guess, is over to CloudFormation because we want to delete last week's stack with our exposed. Now, only delete this if you've already gotten your some guard duty alerts for SSH brute force. And then you can just go ahead and delete this and it'll wipe that whole stack out and nothing to worry about there. While that's deleting, let's go to create stack and we're going to go with new resources. And the template this time is lab 37 at the end. You'll want to again pick that up from the blog post and click next. Now for our stack details, this week we want to call it AKIA. That's so you remember it can be distinguished from our last lab in case you still have that other stack deleting as we're building this one. Click next. Scroll down, click next, scroll down, check the blue checkbox. That's so we can create the role so we can use Session Manager, and then click Submit. And now it's creating. While this is running, I'm not going to pause the video. We've actually got some work to do. Now, for those of you that did our lab on Session Manager logging, we need to actually turn that off because I don't have a way to automate assigning a role with the right permissions to keep that logging, and it actually causes a lab to break. It's a little bit messy. So go to Session Manager, then go to Preferences, and go to S3 logging. Now mine's turned off right now because I was doing my practice for the lab. Yours likely looks like this, and you want to disable S3 logging. Why? Because if I do enable, the bucket that we had set up is not accessible with the permissions and how we have this particular lab set up. So we're going to go ahead and turn that off, and then we're going to click save. It's one of the reasons we're doing this in a test account. In an enterprise environment, this would be all standardized and you wouldn't have to worry about it. Now, with Session Manager turned off, let's go to IAM, and we're going to create an IAM user, and we're going to give that user an access key. This is not something you're ever going to want to do. This is just so you learn how to do it and what it looks like. So click on Users and go to Create User. And we're going to do this in a very safe way. First, I'm going to call it Delete Me, so I remembered to delete it. And we're not going to give that user console access. Well, let's just go ahead and click Next. So they're not going to be able to log into the console. We don't have any groups. We don't have any permissions we want to copy. Let's go attach policies directly, and then let's cheat. Scroll all the way down, and click Next. Notice this is a user with 0 permissions, so we have 0 exposure. There's nothing bad that could happen if it did get compromised. Doesn't have a username and password, doesn't have an access key, so really it's like a totally empty user. Now, we do want to see what it's like to create an access key and what those look like. So once you're done creating the user, go click on that username, scroll down, go to security credentials, scroll down, and go create access key. Notice Amazon has all these different options, and you're going like, Rich, you told me an access key is just an access key, right? That's absolutely correct, but watch what happens. If I click this way, it says, don't do that. You don't like access keys. Use these 2 options instead. If I click this one, no, 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 no. You should be using an IAM role. All right, let's go try local code. Use an integrated development environment, which supports the AWS toolkit. They're doing their best to make sure you do not create an access key. And you would have to click that checkbox to proceed because Amazon's like, these are risky. We are really tired of everybody getting hacked because you create these things and expose them. So we're going to give you all the warnings we can possibly think of. In the end, if you select Other, which is our use case today, and click Next. We want to have a description. We don't care about a description because we're going to delete this instantly. Click Create Access Key. Here we go. Let's zoom in a little bit here, and you can see the access key starts with, as I mentioned, AKIA. That's why you hear us cloud security pros talking about AKIAs all the time. And then you have the secret access key. You can show it. You can never recover this, by the way, after this one time. Ooh, look, this one's free. I don't know. That's totally random. Kind of cool. I never actually get real words in these things. You can copy it out. You can save it. But there's no way, if you lose the secret key, you can't recover it. Once it's off of this screen, it's gone for good. So we're going to click Done. Now you're like, Rich, you just exposed an access key and a secret key to the world. Oh, it's going to get worse. And you have your access key and your secret key associated in your account now. And it's pretty cool. When was it last used? What region was it used in? When was it created? What was the last service it used? You know what? We didn't use this, and we're going to make sure nobody can ever use this. Scroll up. It says delete me on this side. It says delete on this side. Click delete. Type in delete me, the name of the IAM user, and that user is gone for good. Well, that's just to show you what an access key is like. But now let's see, like, if you had one, how would you use it? So let's go to EC2. And we have an instance running there that we built off that CloudFormation template. So go to Instances, and your name of your instance will be AKIA. Click the checkbox, and as we've been doing, go to Connect for Session Manager, and then Connect. We are now logged into that instance, and let me go ahead and to make these command lines easier. And the command lines are all in the blog post, so you can copy and paste them. So you don't have to memorize them from the video, just use this with the blog post to copy and paste. And the first thing we want to do is change directory. So we're going to, that's like, I can't remember what it is in Windows. I don't use Windows anymore. CD and then tilde. That means we're going to go to the user's home directory. Within that home directory, if I click ls for you Windows people, it's like a dir. I remember that much to show the directory, and there's nothing in there. Well, sort of. There's some hidden folders in there. And if I go ls-a for all, it's going to show me those hidden folders. And we don't care about any of those except this one that's labeled AWS. When you're using credentials and you're using the command line, this is where you hide your configuration files. They're not really hidden. It's just so it doesn't annoy you, but this is where you put your configuration files. So let's change directory into .aws, and then we'll do ls. That's like that dir. No hidden files this time. We have a config and credentials. Now, config is something that's going to set up something called a profile. If you want to look at it, you can just go cat config. Cat just reads out a file, and this is what's inside that file. The profile name is S.L.A.W. It says use the US West 2 region by default. Well, let's look at credentials. Cat credentials. And you see an access key and a secret access key. Now, you're probably asking yourself, that AKIA, that's not the one that I just created in my account, and that's not the one you just created in your account. you're correct. This is one I created in one of my other accounts that is not associated with our Cloud S.L.A.W organization. It's where I host a bunch of stuff. I created an access key and a secret key for an IAM user. And let's figure out what that IAM user can do. Okay, so these are now embedded. This is a really common technique, and this is why I'm making eye contact right now. This is how a lot of um, this is how a lot of developers and admins will store credentials. They can create a bunch of different profiles and they can create a bunch of different credential sets. You'll notice these credentials here are associated with S.L.A.W, that same profile. And so you can switch your profiles, which switches what kind of an IAM user you're working with. And these even work with IAM roles, but we're not going to go there today. We're just showing you with IAM users. Super common. This stuff gets embedded all over the place. Well, let's see how risky that is. Going back into the console, and I'm going to pause for 1 second because I've got to copy out a command line that I've got in the blog post. Okay, I copied out that command line and I pasted it in. And this command line is pretty straightforward. So AWS is the Amazon command line tool. So this says, hey, AWS, I want to send an API call to EC2. That API call is describe image attributes, and I want the attributes of one specific image, and the specific attribute I want is its description, and I want you to use the credentials associated with that S.L.A.W profile. Well, let's go ahead and see how that works and hit enter. Now, made a little bit of an oopsie there. I put the wrong image ID. I actually have this locked down pretty tight. I made an update to the lab and I used the wrong one. So you notice that ID won't work. This ID will work. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go with that image ID and I'm going to hit enter. And so now you saw it failed because I didn't have permissions. And in this case, now I see the value. If you see this, you completed the AKIA lab. Let me go ahead and clear the screen again, and I'm going to enter that one more time just to get rid of that messy error message. And using that access key and that secret key that is associated with an IAM user in one of my accounts, you can describe that image. Okay, so this is using the credentials that I provided to you that I embedded into this instance. And you know what? It's really easy to accidentally leave that in there when you're creating an image because that's all I did is I just created an image the normal way. Now watch what happens if you try to make that same API call, but without the profile. This is going to default to the IAM role that is associated with your instance that's running right now, and that's the role that we assigned for SSM. So instead of using the credentials that I embedded, this is now trying to use the credentials just associated with that IAM role, and you're going to get an error associated with it. This is why access keys are so dangerous. I just showed you a real life example where you could imagine I created an image that I wanted to share because maybe I had some code or some data set in there I wanted to make public. And I left my embedded credentials in it. And then anybody can find those and they can do whatever they want in my account with the credentials that I left there. And it's really easy to find those. This is the kind of thing that attackers do all the time. Now, leaving them embedded in an image is one way to expose them, but we put them in containers or people post them in GitHub or they leave them in application code. These are static credentials. They're super dangerous. You don't want to use them. And this is why your mission is to destroy every AKIA you can get your hands on. And a bunch of you probably work in places where they are all over the place, but you want to get rid of them. Now, what's the alternative? Well, we're going to go over that next week where we're going to learn how to use IAM roles. And down the road, I'm even going to show you how to do this with IAM Identity Center so you don't have to worry about keeping these static credentials because I'm not using them right now. Actually, all of these labs, when I'm doing my command line work to set it up, I'm using Identity Center. It's super cool. We'll get to it someday. But for now, remember, we've talked about in 2 weeks, we demonstrated the two biggest ways organizations get hacked. We made something public, which was an instance with SSH exposed, and it was brute forced within hours. It was within 3 hours in my case. And then we exposed credentials and we showed how that can be abused by an attacker. And we showed a real world situation, a common way credentials are exposed. If you learn these two things, I'm going to be really happy. You know more than a lot of people in a lot of organizations, and I hope it works out. Okay, that's it for this week, and we'll see you soon.